Well, here it is. Day 31. Again, I'm trying to do some catching up today. It would be wrong of me not to do a review of this film because it's an adaptation of my favourite novel. When I did my degree, my dissertation was largely about this book. It's the only film I've seen at the cinema twice for a long time. Obviously, I loved it. Once again, I'm going to call on Chris Stuckman. I picked apart his review of Happy Death Day. I say picked apart. I just took the piss. Because I'm a mealy-mouthed cretin, and that's how I get my kicks. And so, let's see what he had to say about it. I imagine because it's a modern horror film, he hated it. Go on, Chris. Tell me how much you hated it.
Oh, I pretty much loved everything about this movie.
Oh, shit.
This is what I want for the jingle on my podcast. It's going to be called John Bolton's podcast. No, that ain't boss at all. There's no you in Bolton, but I guess that doesn't matter if you're singing it. And I'm a writer. See if you can work that in some way. Basically, just make me sound awesome. Cheers.
I'm going to stick with Chris for this. I want to see what else he has to say about it. And then I will offer my thoughts. Because, boy, do I have some thoughts about it. Here's what Chris has to say.
The movie does justice to the greatest strengths of the novel and wisely omits parts of the novel that didn't work. My biggest discrepancy with the novel was Beverly Marsh's decision to please all of her young friends. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. That was just a gigantic WTF moment that didn't really work for me.
I am going to interject here. I had a feeling this was going to come up because every time I see anybody review or even talk about it, the book or the film or the miniseries, there was as well, they bring up this scene in the sewers at the end of the well, it's towards the end of the book actually. So to explain the premise, it is about this evil entity that supposedly lives in the sewers. I say supposedly because clearly it has powers where it can change its appearance and can not teleport's probably the wrong word for it, but in the book it describes it disappearing and there being this popping sound as if air was rushing to fill the void in space that it previously occupied. So whether it really lives in the sewers, like, you know, it hangs its hat there, if you see what I mean, or whether that's just it's sort of like its office, I don't know. So anyway, it lives in the sewers and it preys on children. It can kill adults too, and does, but children is what it likes best because it feeds on fear, and children are more susceptible, I suppose, to fear. Their fear is more real and visceral, and I think it refers to eating scared children as though the fear salts the meat, I think is the exact words used. So that's it. And it takes the form of a clown called Pennywise. I think in the book it's explained such that, you know, what child doesn't love a clown? If they've got any sense, all of them. And so it appears as a clown, but it also manifests as the thing that the child finds the most frightening because that scares it the most and therefore makes it taste better. I feel like I've simplified quite a complex novel there. Sorry. So belief is quite a big thing in It, the book, and It, the film, and It, the miniseries, there was as well. Because clearly the children need to believe in it and believe that the things they're seeing are real in order to be frightened of them. So belief works on that sense. However, in addition to that, their only real defense against it, the clown, from the book It and the film and the miniseries there was as well, the only defense they really have is their belief in their ability to defeat it, the clown. I won't go through it again. So, for example, Eddie Kaspbrak is kind of a hypochondriac. He's got this overbearing mother that basically treats him as if he were ill, even though he's not really ill at all. And his belief in, for example, his asthma inhaler he uses as a weapon. His belief in that it's you know, it is what it is how he's able to use it as a weapon. Similarly, Bill, stuttering Bill, keeps repeating this mantra. It's actually a mantra derived from a novella called Donovan's Brain, but the mantra is he thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. And in Donovan's Brain, the character that keeps thinking that phrase over and over again does it to try and avoid becoming under the control of the brain. And in It, Bill keeps repeating it because it helps him with his stutter. And he also uses that phrase as a weapon, and that phrase does come up in the film. I don't think it's particularly explained why he says it or what it really means or anything, but I guess that's sort of there for the people who've read the book. You should read the book, it's brilliant. But it is a very big read. And so belief in that sense is also very important. Now, what happens at the end of the book in the sewers is that Bev comes to understand that they're strongest as a unit, they're strongest as a group, and that inevitably at the end of the way the book works is the fight with It, the clown, at the end, which you see in the film, happens sort of twice in the book, and you kind of flip back and forth page by page almost between when they're fighting it as kids and when they're fighting it as adults. So really you see them fighting it twice. So actually the climax of them fighting it is literally at the end of the book rather than at the end of the first part and then again at the end of the second part. And so at the end of the fight with it when they're children, Beverly realises that they are going to sort of drift apart, and that if they ever needed to kind of stand up against It again, that's going to be much more difficult for them as individuals than as a group. And so she comes to realise, perhaps because of the upbringing she's had with her slightly dodgy father, is to have sex. She doesn't really fully understand what sex is, which is important because the film intimates that her dad's been raping her. I mean, that sounds awful, but obviously it is awful. I mean, it sounds sort of a terrible thing to say about his character, but I think the film really does make it very clear that that's the message it's trying to put across. In the book, not so much. So at the end she realises that the only way to sort of bond them permanently together is to do this act, which she describes, like it's described as being the act of It. You know, have you done It yet? Oh, I went in last night, my parents were doing It. And so the word It has a kind of double meaning in the book, a sort of double significance. And so she does have sex with each of the other losers club. But see, the thing is, it'd be very easy to read that scene and go, oh, what? Kids having sex in the sewer? Oh, that's disgusting. Which is a fair point. But you have to read that scene in the context of what's happening. You have to understand the reasoning behind it. And I think that if you do that, you appreciate it happening and you don't necessarily just see it as ugh. And I kind of feel like Chris is missing the point. I mean, yeah, it's not a particularly pleasant scene, but it's not gratuitous by any means. And actually what it says about her experience of her and Ben, bearing in mind that they are meant to end up together, spoilers, sorry, it's quite sweet, actually. But anyway, just my 5 pence worth. So It, I read for the first time when I think I'd finished school, and it left quite a big impression on me. And so when I came to do my degree, I wanted to focus on It. And actually the focus of my dissertation was, well, the main focus was the figure of the child in horror literature. So I talked about It, but I also talked about loads of things. And I also had a section on childhood sexuality, because clearly in It that's a significant theme. And so the reason why my annoyance of people who misinterpret that scene as being gratuitous, that's partly that is because I've thought about it quite a lot, and obviously I'm not approving of it by any means, but taken in the context of the book. And frankly, there are a lot worse things happen in this book than people who love one another having sex, frankly. Most of which is omitted from the film, incidentally. The character Patrick Hotsetter in the book is, in many ways, far worse than Henry Bowers. Really far worse. But I'm not going to say any more than that. But you should watch it, read it. It's really good. Watch it too if you haven't already. And so my love for the book meant that when I discovered that they were making a film of it, I was really excited. It's the only film I can ever recall actually having an interest in from the day I found out that it was, slated to be made, right up until the day it came out in cinemas. I followed its progress. I was there when the first photo of Pennywise's costume was unveiled. Well, that was it really, and then it came out about a year later. That's really all I remember. But yeah, so I had a vested interest in it because I really love the book and I really like the mini-series in spite of what people say about it. I think it did a really good job actually of portraying the finale, given how big the finale is and how difficult it must be on any level to present that on the screen, be it silver or silver screen cinema, isn't it? So small, presuming small screen is televisions, unless you've got a big television. And so I was really excited about it, like properly excited about it. I wanted to go and see it on the day it came out. Wasn't able to, went the night after. Went to see it again. And the reason I went to see it a second time was because I had issues with the ending. Because I won't give anything away about what happens in the book in the ending any more than I have already given things away. But the ending of the book is this kind of big, kind of almost interdimensional battle on a huge scale. And that's not an easy thing to put across on the in any way, shape or form on the screen. But also there's a lot of things that need to have been done during the course of the film to kind of build into that happening, and they weren't, and then so therefore the ending wasn't that faithful to what happens in the book particularly. I mean, they have a fight with it in the sewers, that much is the case. And so I kind of walked out of it thinking there was so much about this film that I loved. The kids who play the kids in it are brilliant. The cast is amazing. Pennywise, the guy who plays Pennywise, is just phenomenal. When Annabelle Creation came out in cinemas, there was a 4 or 5 minute preview of it at the very beginning of it, and the preview of it was basically the first scene of the film, where Georgie meets Pennywise briefly. And I never got to see. I think it was only in US cinemas actually. I never got to see it obviously because I don't live in the US. But it appeared on YouTube the way these things do. So I got to watch this 4-minute preview, and it's just amazing. Even now, I downloaded it off YouTube. Even now, I still watch that little bit over and over, just because the performance of the guy that plays Pennywise and the performance of the kid that plays Georgie is amazing, and the score is just incredible. If you'd said to me that somebody could do a score for an adaptation of it that somehow is better than what Richard Bellis did for the miniseries, I would have laughed in your face. Right in your face. But it's really good. And so when I went to go and see it at the cinemas, I'd seen the opening scene millions of times, probably, up until the point where Pennywise bites his arm off. I hadn't seen that bit. And so I love that. I love the kid characters. I love they changed a lot. So the setting of the film is moved from the 50s to the 80s. The fears the kids have are different because, of course, I think Richie's fear is werewolves, because I presume he's been to see a werewolf film, and that's obviously made a lasting impression on him. Kids' understanding and awareness of werewolves now is from that bloody werewolf in Bloody Twilight, which is the worst CGI ever. Unforgivably so, because, frankly, wolves are real. If you can't create a fake wolf in a film, bearing in mind they're real, they exist, you can go and see them, there's no excuse for it. You could kind of forgive bad CGI of things that don't exist, because it's difficult to realise something that doesn't really exist, but wolves do. Frankly, just use a real wolf, because frankly, if a real wolf comes on the set and you're filming and it ravages Kristen Stewart, good. So they moved the setting from the 50s to the 80s, because, as I say, the things that people were seeing in cinemas and therefore were afraid of in the 50s is sort of meaningless to people now. So it's kind of moved to the 80s, and so a lot of, pretty much all the fears, I think, are changed. Richie, for instance, was scared of werewolves in the book, and in the film is scared of clowns, which is perfectly plausible, and it kind of works. And other little things have changed, like Mike is sort of the group historian in the book, but in the film it's Ben. I don't know, that seems fine, I guess, because they changed Mike's backstory as well, so I guess maybe there's enough for Mike to be doing that's, significant for his character that they need to sort of offload the historian part on someone else, and Ben doesn't really have much going on, so it kind of makes sense that it goes to him. Otherwise, pretty faithful to the book in terms of the events that take place. I was really pleased that they kept the leper at Neibolt Street in. There was so much in the book. I mean, the book is vast, and clearly even if you take into account the fact that if you split the book into two halves, kids and adults, which the book isn't really split like that, but if you were to do that, there is still a vast amount of stuff in the kids bit to try and put on the screen. And I think the stuff they kept in, they did a brilliant job of. Henry Bowers cutting his initials into Ben's stomach. I was actually surprised they did that. They did it in the TV miniseries, but they didn't actually see him cutting it. He sort of escaped before then. Whereas Bowers actually does carve an H in. And that's the other thing, is the stuff they didn't put in, but there's still little hints to it. So like earlier on in the film, they're walking down the corridor and they walk past Bowers and his group of cronies. And Patrick Hotsetter gives one of them this look, just this little look. And I noticed it when we went to see it for the first time. I didn't know he was Patrick Hotsetter at the time, but I knew he was Patrick Hotsetter from the look he gave that kid, because it kind of made me feel a bit uneasy. And so instantly I thought, well, that's obviously the Hotsetter character. Great. There's another bit when they're on the bridge and Henry's cutting into him. There's two of the bullies. We won't go into too much detail. Like, there's one called Belch Huggins, who you only really see in one scene, and he belches in it, and that's pretty much it. He's sort of shocked that Bowers is going ahead with this carving thing. It's like, that's a bit much. There's you can punch him a bit and stuff. That's all fine, but that's too far. Whereas Patrick is kind of like gleeful in that scene. He looks at him like, yeah, come on, do it, Henry. And that was really good. So even stuff that they've taken out, they've still left in little hints. I won't say anything about the turtle or the implication that has for the ending of, potentially, if they do it, the second film. But there were little nods towards that. Very, very subtle ones. Like, for instance, Georgie left behind a model of a turtle he made out of Lego, which later on Bill drops and it breaks, and that kind of a little nod to the book. It just depends, I guess, on how far they go with that in the chapter 2 thing. But they did a really good job of being faithful to the book, and Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise was phenomenal. There are jump scares. I don't necessarily dislike jump scares, but you can have too much of a good thing. I never felt like the jump scares cheapened the film. Some of the scenes are like kind of genuinely creepy. The thing that I think really, really impressed me was that for a film that's got children in it, it was genuinely frightening. There were certain scenes that make you uncomfortable. Bev's dad in the book is a much more nuanced kind of character. I think the relationship he has with Bev is much more complicated than the film tries to make it seem. I think the film just goes for out and out child molester, which is understandable because you don't have, I don't know, what is it, 1,000 pages that book is? You don't have that amount of space to flesh out. And the one thing that King does amazingly well is characters. Even in the books I've read of his that weren't so good, the character side of things is always amazing because he just writes characters so well. You live and breathe these people for 500 odd pages. And so they did a brilliant job, really, of capturing any of that in a film. The score, as I've said, is amazing. Benjamin Wallfish, I think that's how you pronounce it, did that. I bought the score on the day of release because basically purely on the basis of the 4-minute scene that was previewed before Annabelle Creation. Based on the music you could barely hear in the background of that, bought the score on the day of release. It's well worth it. It's 2 CDs. Great. So I mentioned the ending earlier. That was the only thing in the entire film that I had an issue with. And again, that's because I've read the book. I remember how amazing the end is, the kind of apocalyptic fight between these children and this sort of interdimensional god almost, and the way that their childhood innocence and belief is what prevails. That's difficult to put on the film, innit? And so the ending of the film is essentially just them beating on Pennywise with bats and sticks and what have you, until he's sort of beaten into submission. And so I don't know, it left me thinking I need to see that again. And so I went a week later and watched it again on my own. Billy No Mates. And it was brilliant. I loved the film. I sat through all the bits I remembered from the first time that I loved. I got to see it again, but obviously I was kind of waiting for this final showdown so I could watch it and think, does this work? And you know what? Actually, having watched it a second time, it does. It does work because when I saw it a second time, I came to realise, and maybe it was because I was a bit lost in it at the first time, but he is literally kind of manifesting their worst fears at them as they're fighting, and they're still fighting back because he no longer has the impact on them that he did have, and that's what weakens him. That's what weakens him to the point where they're able to defeat him, albeit temporarily, because he loses that hold over them. Bev, first of all, he kind of kidnaps Bev in the film, which doesn't happen in the book, and she becomes a kind of damsel in distress, which I was in two minds about because Bev is quite a strong character, and it felt like they were kind of going against that by having her so kind of easily kidnapped. But again, if you watch the film, it kind of fits and it makes sense and it works. And you have to. It's like with Ghostbusters. When the Ghostbusters reboot, is it a remake? I don't know. Came out, and I was vehemently against watching it. I point blank refused to go and watch it, and then it came out, and I thought, you know what? I never got to see Ghostbusters in the cinema. I really want to be able to go to a cinema and watch a Ghostbusters film. I miss that, so I went, and I really, really enjoyed it. Because you have to distance yourself from it. They're different things. Ghostbusters, the original film, and all the things you love about it, and Ghostbusters, the new film, that's it, are two separate things. One doesn't overwrite the other. The presence of a new Ghostbusters film doesn't mean the old one doesn't exist anymore. It's still there. You can still watch it. It's still ace. And it's the same. You can either go and watch it as an adaptation of the novel and appreciate how well they did. I mean, this film is just... It's so successful for a horror film, for a Stephen King adaptation. All of his adaptations are shit, broadly speaking. They're really kind of broken tradition with this. You can either go and see it or rent it when it comes out, because I guess that's the next thing that will happen. As an in appreciation of the fact they've taken this massive tome and they've managed to do anything with it on screen. Or you can go and see it as just simply a horror film, and it kind of works on both levels. But I think the criticisms that have been levelled at it for not doing enough of the book or not being accurate enough to the book, I don't think they stand up, because my attitude to it is that it's an interpretation of the book. Here's one possible way of interpreting the book and seeing how it might have been made into a film. If you don't like it, just go and read the book again. I think it was brilliant, genuinely brilliant. It's one of my favourite horror films ever. It's completely restored my faith in modern horror films, although much of that faith has been eroded these last few weeks by the fact that all the films I've seen since I saw it have been mostly terrible. But I really enjoyed it. I think it does really good sort of lip service to the book, but also it does enough things of its own that it's its own sort of separate thing in its own right. It deserves every inch of the success that it's had. I literally can't wait for whatever it is, September 2019, for Chapter 2 to come out. That's going to be a long, long wait. So I should look forward to any reveals of costumes between now and then, and nothing else. When The Exorcist came out, and I wrote about this in my dissertation, that was one of the other books I wrote about, was The Exorcist. When that came out, I can't remember what it was now, but I read something that said that it's kind of, it's amazing how much of the book they actually did put in. Before you start bemoaning the fact that all these things were taken out and stuff, actually think about how much stuff they actually kept in. And it is very similar to that. You could very easily read it if you've already read it, and go and watch the film and think, oh, they missed out this and this, and there's this whole load of characters here that have been completely missed out. But actually, when you think about how much of that book they included, I think it's amazing. It is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Cannot recommend it highly enough. If I was to award stars for films, which I don't, I'd give it 5. If I was to award percentages for films, which I don't, I'd give it in the 90s somewhere. Is it as good as The Exorcist in my own mind? I don't know. They're totally different films. Giving them any kind of a score is basically pointless, because giving them a score suggests that you're comparing one with another, which you can't really do, which ultimately renders any review of films largely pointless and arbitrary. And this, therefore, has been a waste of everyone's time.
Come back soon for the next episode of John Bolton's podcast. What horror movie will he be reviewing? Who knows? Who cares?